Imagine this for a moment. The only princess of the most powerful kingdom on earth is violated by her own brother, and her father, the warrior king who once defeated a giant with a stone, remains silent. Night settles over the palace of Jerusalem, and the story begins in quiet halls, heavy with unspoken tension and sorrow. Tamar wore the sacred robe woven in many colors, a garment reserved only for the virgin daughters of the king. It symbolized honor, protection, and royal dignity. Yet, while wearing this robe, she was drawn into the private chamber of Amnon, the firstborn son of King David. He had claimed to be ill, but what happened in that room became the spark that would later ignite violence within Israel and deeply wound the royal family. Perhaps the most unsettling truth in this story is not only the crime that occurred, but also the silence that followed. King David said nothing, not immediately and not decisively. That silence reveals something painfully human about the man Scripture describes as a man after God's own heart. The Scriptures introduce Tamar quietly. In the book of 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 1, we read these simple words: Tamar was beautiful. Pause there for a moment. She was beautiful. In a palace filled with servants, wives, and concubines, Tamar stood apart with a presence that drew attention whenever she entered a room. Conversations slowed, eyes lifted, and hearts became suddenly aware. Amnon, the firstborn son of King David and heir to Israel's throne, became captivated by her presence. Consider what that means. Amnon was not an ordinary man in the kingdom. He was the crown prince, the future king, a man who by custom and power could have many opportunities for marriage. Royal marriages could be arranged, and concubines were common within royal households. Yet none of those things satisfied him, because Tamar, his half-sister, stirred something within him that power and privilege could not quiet. What began as an attraction slowly changed shape. At first, it was a passing thought, but soon it became a fixation. In time, it darkened into something far more consuming. The Scriptures describe what followed with striking honesty. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 2, we read that Amnon was so distressed that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar. The passage explains that she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to approach her. Listen carefully to those words: distressed and ill. These are not the words of gentle affection or healthy love. They describe a mind overwhelmed and consumed from within. Imagine the days passing in the palace as Amnon lies in his chamber, staring at the ceiling beams while the sun rises and sets beyond the walls of Jerusalem. The heir to Israel's throne, who should have been studying leadership and counsel, now fades in private obsession. His face grows pale and his clothing hangs loosely on a body growing thin. Food loses its taste, and even sleep offers no peace. His thoughts return again and again to the same image: Tamar. Servants begin to whisper as palace attendants notice the change in the crown prince. Once strong and energetic, he now weakens before their eyes. Desire left unchecked begins to consume him like a fire burning inward. But one man observed the situation more carefully than the others. His name was Jonadab. Scripture explains that he was the son of Shemiah, David's brother, making him Amnon's cousin. In 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 3, the Bible adds an important detail. Jonadab was a very crafty man. The word crafty suggests cleverness that is not entirely innocent, a mind that sees opportunities others miss. One morning, Jonadab stepped into Amnon's chamber. The air was stale, clothing lay unwashed, and dishes sat untouched on the table. On the bed lay the future king of Israel, looking less like a prince and more like a man deeply weakened. "Why are you, the king's son, so troubled morning after morning?" Consider the weight of that question, morning after morning. This was not a passing mood or a difficult week, but a pattern that had stretched across many days. Amnon's distress was visible to anyone who truly looked, and Jonadab had been watching. Amnon turned his face away as the frustration within him finally became words. "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." This confession set the next events in motion. He used the word love, but what lived in his heart was not the patient and self-giving love praised in Scripture. Instead, it was possession disguised as affection, a desire to obtain something regardless of the cost. Jonadab listened quietly while another process unfolded in his mind. He saw the desperation in Amnon's trembling hands and understood Tamar's protected position within the palace. As a royal virgin, she was carefully guarded, and approaching her openly was impossible. But for a mind like Jonadab's, what seemed impossible could appear like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Pause for a moment and consider how carefully this request had been formed. Amnon did not ask for an ordinary servant. He did not request palace cooks or the attendants who normally cared for him. Instead, he named Tamar specifically and asked that she come to prepare food for him. He explained that she should prepare the food before his eyes and that he might eat from her hand, as if the kindness of his sister would restore his strength. The request sounded harmless and even tender to a concerned father. For that reason, King David accepted the request without suspicion. To him, it sounded like the voice of a suffering son asking for comfort from family. "Go to Tamar and tell her to come to Amnon's house and prepare food for him." The servant hurried through the palace corridors, carrying the command of the king. In the quiet chambers reserved for the women of the royal household, Tamar received the message. She accepted it without hesitation because she honored her father and trusted the request. Her half-brother was believed to be ill, and her father had asked her to help. Tamar gathered wheat flour and the simple ingredients needed to prepare cakes meant to comfort and restore strength. She wrapped herself in the distinctive robe she always wore, the long garment of many colors worn by the virgin daughters of the king. The robe symbolized dignity, purity, and royal protection. Unaware of what waited ahead, Tamar walked through the palace corridors with quiet confidence. Meanwhile, Jonadab quietly slipped away from Amnon's chamber because his role in the plan was complete. David believed the request. Tamar was on her way, and Amnon remained waiting. On his bed, Amnon kept his eyes closed, yet his heart raced. Months of restless desire and unhealthy obsession were now approaching their dangerous conclusion. Something that once seemed impossible now appeared within reach. His breathing grew faster, not from illness, but from anticipation. King David believed he had done the right thing by helping a sick son. With a father's quiet relief, he left the room, unaware of the danger ahead. Outside the chamber, soft footsteps began to echo through the corridor. Tamar was approaching, exactly as the plan required. Tamar arrived carrying the ingredients carefully in her hands. She brought flour, oil, and seasonings needed to prepare the cakes her father had requested. She entered the chamber with the quiet purpose of fulfilling a duty of care. "Send everyone out." The servants obeyed immediately because the crown prince had spoken. One by one, they left the chamber, and the heavy door closed behind them. The sound echoed through the room, and they were now alone. Tamar began her work by pouring flour into a bowl and kneading the dough with practiced hands. The rhythm of the work was calm and familiar as she warmed oil in a small pan. The smell of fresh flour slowly filled the chamber. From his bed, Amnon watched every movement carefully. His eyes followed the motion of her hands shaping the dough beside the fire. Tamar worked with quiet concentration, occasionally looking toward the bed to check on her brother. She believed she was helping a sick family member who needed care. When the cakes were ready, Tamar placed them carefully on a serving tray. The simple food appeared comforting and nourishing. She carried the tray toward the bed with no suspicion in her heart. She leaned forward kindly and offered the food to her brother. This was the moment Amnon had been waiting for. Suddenly, Amnon moved quickly and seized her arm with shocking force. The weak patient David had visited disappeared in an instant. Scripture records his words in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 11. "Come, lie with me, my sister." The words carried the tone of a command rather than affection. The heir to David's throne revealed the troubling desire hidden in his heart. Tamar's eyes widened in shock at the sudden change. She tried to pull away, but Amnon tightened his grip on her arm. He pulled her toward the bed while ignoring her resistance. No. Tamar struggled and tried to pull free with all her strength. The tension in the room rose as the struggle continued. Amnon's breathing grew heavy as he tried to overpower her resistance. Tamar realized the painful truth that this was not a sick brother needing care. She understood she had been drawn into isolation behind a closed door. The tray fell from her hands and crashed onto the floor. Her voice rose in protest as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 12.
"No, my brother. Please do not force me."
Her words were a desperate appeal to stop the wrongdoing. She continued speaking urgently, hoping reason and conscience might stop what was happening. Such a thing should not be done in Israel.
Even in fear, Tamar appealed to the moral foundation of her people. She was calling upon Amnon's conscience and the laws that guided the nation of Israel. She reminded him that their people lived by a covenant and a shared moral identity. Her words meant that this act would violate the values that defined their community. Tamar spoke not only from fear, but from the deep principles taught to their nation. She pleaded with him to remember who they were as a people. She reminded him that they were descendants of Abraham and followers of the law given at Mount Sinai. Their nation had been built upon moral boundaries meant to protect dignity and justice.
Tamar urged him not to cross a boundary that could bring lasting harm. "Do not do this wicked thing." The language she used carried serious meaning in the Hebrew scriptures. Such words were often used for actions that bring serious moral consequences. Tamar understood the gravity of what Amnon was attempting to do. She knew this would not remain a private matter, but would affect their family and community. She tried to help him understand the seriousness of the situation. Her mind moved quickly while she continued resisting his grip. She hoped that some sense of conscience still remained in her brother. She hoped he might still choose to stop. "Please speak to the king. He will not refuse me to you." In that moment, Tamar suggested a lawful path forward instead of wrongdoing. She proposed marriage as a way to preserve dignity and follow accepted customs. Her words revealed both wisdom and desperation. She offered a solution that would allow Amnon to act with honor rather than violence. She reasoned that the king might consider such a request if presented properly. Tamar spoke carefully, even while facing danger. She hoped reason and patience might prevent wrongdoing. The courage required to speak these words was remarkable. Tamar was willing to sacrifice her own future happiness to avoid greater harm. She even offered the possibility of marriage to the man threatening her. Her goal was to prevent violence and preserve dignity. It was a desperate effort to protect herself and her family from deeper tragedy. If the matter had been brought before the king honestly, it might have been considered. Royal families sometimes arranged marriages for political or social reasons. However, such a path would have required patience and respect. That path would have required Amnon to treat Tamar as a person rather than a possession. It would have required acknowledging her dignity and her right to choose. It also would have required patience and careful conversation. Honor would have needed to guide his actions. By this point, Amnon had moved beyond those choices. He heard Tamar's words, but rejected her reasoning. The heir to David's throne had crossed a dangerous moral line. He was no longer pursuing love or honorable marriage. He was no longer concerned with what was right. His desire had become selfish and destructive. Instead of speaking, he answered with force. His grip tightened as he ignored everything Tamar had said. Tamar pushed against him with her free hand and tried to create distance. Her fingers grasped at his clothing as she searched for a way to escape. But Amnon was stronger and physically larger. Months of planning and deception had led to this moment. The scheme with Jonadab and the deception of their father had created this dangerous situation. What could have been resolved with patience had become violence. Amnon forced Tamar onto the bed with his weight. The place that had been presented as a sick room revealed a darker truth. Tamar struggled desperately and searched for any way to escape. She had come to care for someone she believed was ill. Instead, she encountered a deep moral failure. During the struggle, Tamar's robe tore at the shoulder. The garment of many colors symbolized her dignity as a daughter of the king. The sound of the tearing fabric filled the room. The moment symbolized the loss of protection and security she once had. Amnon covered her mouth to silence her cries for help. Moments earlier, she had spoken with reason and offered an honorable solution. Now her voice was suppressed by someone choosing violence over honor. Tamar struggled with desperate determination to defend herself. Amnon reacted with anger, but did not stop. His mind appeared overwhelmed by months of uncontrolled obsession. Tamar's pleas and resistance did not change his actions. Scripture summarizes the tragic moment in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 14. He refused to listen to her and used his strength against her. The text emphasizes that he ignored every plea and warning. He understood the consequences, yet chose not to listen. In the end, Amnon chose to continue with his violent actions. The assault took place in the quiet chamber where he had pretended to be weak and helpless. The smell of fresh bread still remained in the air, and the cakes Tamar had prepared were scattered across the floor. The sister who had come with kindness to help was harmed by the very person she had come to serve. Tamar felt physical pain during the assault, but the deeper suffering was emotional and personal. In those moments, she understood that something precious had been taken from her. Her dignity and her hopes for the future were deeply wounded. Her sense of safety and place within the royal household was shaken. Eventually, her body stopped resisting because exhaustion overcame her strength. Such stillness should never be confused with consent or acceptance. When the violence ended, Amnon moved away from her. His breathing was heavy as the room fell into silence. The obsession that had consumed him for months suddenly disappeared. It faded quickly, like a fever breaking. The chamber became quiet, except for their breathing. Outside, the palace continued its normal activity without knowing what had happened. Tamar lay still, with tears falling silently. Her tears came not only from pain, but from humiliation and betrayal. She realized that someone she trusted had intentionally harmed her. Meanwhile, something changed within Amnon. The obsession that had controlled him was gone. Instead, a darker emotion began to grow in his heart. Where desire once burned, another feeling appeared. That emotion was hatred. What happened ended Tamar's innocence and began a darker chapter for Amnon. Scripture records the change in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 15. The text explains that Amnon's hatred toward Tamar became stronger than the desire he once claimed to feel. The same emotion that had driven him to obsession was replaced with intense hostility. This change was immediate and overwhelming, rather than gradual regret. The woman he once claimed to love became someone he now despised. "Get up, get out." His words were harsh and filled with cold rejection. Tamar slowly lifted her head in shock. The sudden change in Amnon's behavior deeply wounded her. "No, please do not send me away. Sending me away after this will cause even greater harm to me." Tamar understood the serious consequences she could face if she were cast out. In that society, a woman harmed in this way could still have protection if she remained within a household. But being expelled would leave her without security or support. She was pleading not to be abandoned completely. Amnon's heart remained hardened. The obsession that once drove him had turned into disgust. Her presence reminded him of his wrongdoing. "Servant." The door opened quickly and the attendant entered the room. Seeing the torn robe and the scattered food, he realized something terrible had happened. "Put this woman out and bolt the door after her." Amnon did not refer to her as his sister, or even by her name. He spoke as if she were a stranger. The servant obeyed the order of the crown prince. He took Tamar by the arm and led her toward the door. Tamar tried to hold together the torn pieces of her robe. The garment that once symbolized her dignity was now damaged. The servant forced her toward the doorway. Tamar stumbled as she walked because of shock and pain. She was pushed out of the room she had entered with compassion. The heavy door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed through the palace corridor. The iron bolt slid into place, locking the door. Tamar stood alone in the hallway with torn clothing and tear-filled eyes. In that moment, the daughter of a king stood alone with her life forever changed. The contrast was heartbreaking. Tamar entered the chamber clothed in honor as a protected daughter of the king. When she emerged, she was no longer seen the same way by the world around her. She stepped out not as a royal virgin, but as someone cast aside and marked by tragedy she never chose. The palace corridors suddenly felt vast and empty. Servants passed by and froze when they saw her. Their eyes widened in shock before they quickly turned away in silence. They understood that something terrible had happened. Silence could not stop the spread of whispers. Murmurs began moving through the palace like wind through dry grass. Tamar's hands trembled as she approached a nearby brazier. She gathered ashes and placed the gray dust upon her head. This act was an ancient sign of mourning. The ash settled into her hair and mixed with the tears on her face. Tamar then grasped the torn fabric of her robe. She tore the garment further, destroying the symbol of her former life. Tamar placed both hands upon her head and began to walk through the corridor. She cried out in deep mourning. Her voice echoed through the stone halls of the palace. Servants stopped moving and courtiers turned their heads. They recognized the voice of Tamar, the daughter of King David. She cried out as someone whose world had collapsed. Tamar walked beyond the palace grounds into the streets of Jerusalem. Tears streamed down her face as she moved forward in shock. She walked with the instinct to reach somewhere safe. People in the streets stopped when they saw her. A royal daughter appearing in such distress shocked everyone. Her torn robe and ashes declared that tragedy had struck the house of David. Tamar finally reached the house of her brother Absalom. By the time she arrived, she was exhausted and barely able to stand. Absalom saw her immediately and understood something terrible had happened. The torn robe and ashes told the story without words. Absalom looked carefully at Tamar, standing at his doorway. The signs of suffering needed no explanation. "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you?" Tamar was unable to speak and only nodded her head. That small movement confirmed what Absalom already suspected. Scripture records Absalom's response in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 20. "Be quiet for now, my sister. He is your brother. Do not let this matter consume your heart." These words may sound cold, but they carry deeper meaning. Absalom understood the harsh reality of power and influence. If Tamar spoke publicly, shame might fall upon her, while Amnon might escape punishment. Absalom knew the political danger of confronting the king's favored son. He advised Tamar to endure and survive for the moment. Quietly, he began thinking about what should happen next. Tamar entered Absalom's house in silence. She moved as though trapped in a dream from which she could not awaken. Her body moved forward, while her mind remained fixed on the trauma she endured. Absalom closed the door behind her to keep the outside world away. Tamar collapsed to the floor as her body trembled from shock. The wounds she carried were both physical and emotional. Absalom brought water in a clay basin and knelt beside her. Gently, he washed the ashes from her hair and face. The water carried away the outward signs of mourning. Yet no water could erase the pain of what had happened. Tamar remained still with empty eyes. Her body remained present, but her spirit seemed distant. The woman who left the palace earlier that day was gone. Absalom wrapped a cloak around her shoulders to cover the torn robe. The damaged garment had become evidence of violence. From that day, Tamar lived in the house of Absalom. Scripture states that she remained desolate, according to 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 20. The word describes deep devastation that does not easily heal. Day after day, Absalom watched his sister suffer. He noticed how she reacted with fear to sudden sounds. She moved quietly through the house like a shadow. Her pain remained visible in every room. Inside Absalom, another feeling began to grow. At first, it was the anger of a brother protecting his sister. Over time, that anger deepened into hatred. Each time he saw Tamar suffer, the feeling grew stronger. Yet Absalom remained outwardly calm and silent. He made no public accusation and demanded no justice openly. Beneath his calm appearance, something dangerous was forming. Meanwhile, rumors began reaching the ears of King David. Servants whispered and officials quietly asked questions. Slowly, the terrible story began moving toward the throne. The truth soon became impossible to hide. Tamar's condition spoke louder than any rumor. Her torn robe, the ashes in her hair, and the grief on her face all pointed to the same tragic reality. Scripture states in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 21, that King David became very angry when he heard what happened. David, the warrior king who had faced giants and united Israel, burned with anger. Yet something unexpected followed his anger. No action was taken. David's anger did not turn into justice or discipline. He did not punish Amnon or remove him from his position as heir. He did not demand justice for Tamar. The same king who punished lesser crimes remained silent in this case. The silence created a deep sense of injustice within the royal household. David's silence sent a powerful message throughout the palace. It suggested that the position of the crown prince carried greater weight than Tamar's suffering. Tamar lived quietly in shame, while Absalom's anger slowly grew. David's refusal to act ensured the story would continue with darker consequences. The king's silence created tension that grew more dangerous with time. Scripture records in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 22, that Absalom spoke neither good nor bad to Amnon. His silence became noticeable in the royal household. He neither insulted Amnon nor acknowledged him. When Amnon entered a room, Absalom behaved as though he were invisible. During palace gatherings, Absalom remained calm and controlled. His face revealed nothing of the anger inside him. Meanwhile, Amnon continued living openly as crown prince. He attended councils and received the honors of the future king. David's silence created the appearance that the wrongdoing would go unpunished. Absalom did not forget what happened. Quietly, he began forming a careful plan. Each day he saw Tamar living in sorrow within his house. Each day he watched Amnon continue enjoying royal privileges. Slowly, Absalom's plan became clearer. Time passed, and 2 years went by. For 2 years, Absalom maintained a calm appearance while his anger hardened. Every day he saw Tamar's quiet suffering. Every day he saw Amnon living without consequences. The contrast strengthened Absalom's determination. Eventually, the season of sheep shearing arrived. The celebration took place at Baal Hazor on Absalom's estate. Sheep shearing was a time of community celebration. Families gathered and landowners hosted feasts. Absalom realized this event provided an opportunity. Come celebrate the harvest with me. Let us share food and wine together as sons of David. Absalom sent invitations to all the king's sons. Amnon accepted the invitation without suspicion. 2 years had passed, and Absalom had shown no visible anger. His silence appeared peaceful to those around him. While the invitation was public, Absalom gave different instructions privately. These instructions were given to servants loyal only to him. The day of the feast arrived and the celebration began. Tables were filled with roasted meat and fresh bread. Large jars poured generous cups of wine. Music played and laughter filled the gathering. Amnon drank freely and enjoyed the celebration. From the head table, Absalom watched his brother carefully. He observed every cup of wine and every moment of laughter. Amnon did not realize he was being watched closely. The wine continued flowing as the celebration grew louder. Amnon's face flushed and his voice grew louder with joy. Then Absalom quietly gave a signal. His servants moved carefully into position around the gathering. To others, they appeared to be serving food and wine. Their positions around Amnon were intentional. Amnon raised his cup again, unaware of the danger. The feast reached its peak with laughter and celebration. No one noticed the tension building beneath the joy. Amnon remained unaware that 2 years of planning were reaching their end. Absalom believed justice for Tamar was about to arrive. Watch carefully. When Amnon becomes merry with wine and I give the signal, strike him. Scripture records this instruction in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 28. The command showed careful planning rather than sudden anger. The servants nodded, understanding the seriousness of the order. Do not be afraid. I have commanded you. Be courageous and strong. With those words, Absalom confirmed his authority over them. Meanwhile, Amnon continued drinking and laughing with his brothers. The wine removed any sense of caution he might have felt. Danger was already closing around him, though he did not see it. The prince, who once used deception, now sat within a trap prepared for him. Amnon sat at the feast, laughing and drinking wine without concern. He celebrated at a gathering hosted by the brother of the sister he had harmed. He lifted his cup with careless joy, unaware of the danger approaching. Across the table, Absalom watched quietly and patiently. His stillness resembled someone waiting for an appointed moment. Absalom observed every laugh and careless movement from Amnon. Nothing escaped his attention during the feast. 2 years had passed since Tamar's suffering. During those years, Absalom watched his sister live in quiet grief. Justice had been delayed, but it had not been forgotten. Absalom met the eyes of his servants and gave a subtle nod. The signal was small, but clearly understood by them. His servants began moving carefully around the banquet tables. Their movements appeared ordinary to the other guests. Hidden beneath their cloaks were weapons. Bronze blades flashed in the afternoon light as they approached Amnon. Amnon finally noticed the blades moving toward him. He attempted to rise from his seat. The wine slowed his reaction and clouded his thinking. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The servants attacked quickly and decisively. Amnon collapsed onto the table and fell to the ground. The firstborn son of David died at the sheep-shearing feast. Blood spread across the ground beneath the tables. The crown prince of Israel was dead by the order of his brother. The other sons of David suddenly realized the danger. Panic spread quickly among them. Chairs overturned and wine cups shattered as they fled. The celebration instantly turned into chaos. The princes hurried to their mules and fled toward Jerusalem. Absalom's servants did not pursue the fleeing princes. Their command had been clear and limited to one target. They remained beside their master with weapons ready. Across the fields, the sound of hooves echoed as the princes rode away. News of the event traveled quickly toward Jerusalem. Absalom has killed all the king's sons, and none of them remain. The message was confused and exaggerated because of panic. King David believed for a moment that every one of his sons had died. David tore his garments and fell to the ground in grief. The palace filled with mourning as he believed his family destroyed. Then another voice spoke within the hall. My lord should not think that all the king's sons are dead. Amnon alone has died. Jonadab was the cousin who had once helped Amnon deceive Tamar. Absalom had determined this from the day Amnon harmed his sister Tamar. Jonadab had recognized the growing hatred in Absalom long before the feast. What seemed sudden to others had been slowly building. David's grief changed, but it did not disappear. One son was dead, and another had become both killer and fugitive. The royal family was beginning to fracture deeply. Absalom fled immediately after Amnon was killed. He rode quickly toward the border of Israel. He fled to Geshur, where his grandfather, King Talmai, ruled. In Jerusalem, David mourned for Amnon each day. The palace entered a long period of grief. The future of the kingdom suddenly seemed uncertain. Tamar heard of Amnon's death quietly. 2 years earlier, she had suffered greatly while he lived freely. Justice had come, but it carried complicated emotions. Her suffering had led to 2 brothers lost in different ways. The house of David had lost another son. The cycle of violence that began earlier had not truly ended. Absalom crossed the border into the land of his mother. Geshur was ruled by King Talmai, Absalom's grandfather. Because it was an independent kingdom, David's authority did not reach there. Talmai welcomed Absalom and offered protection. Absalom lived in his grandfather's palace during exile, yet the exile carried heavy consequences for his future. He had given up his life in Israel. The price of his revenge had been the loss of his place in the kingdom. Scripture records that Absalom fled to Geshur and remained there for 3 years, according to 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 38. 3 full years passed while Absalom lived in exile, far from Jerusalem. He lived far from the palace where he had grown up. He was separated from Tamar, whose suffering he had avenged. He was also far from his father, whose approval he still desired. Exile became a constant reminder of memories that would not disappear. In Jerusalem, time slowly softened the grief in King David's heart. The pain of losing Amnon remained, but it became easier for the king to bear. Scripture in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 39 says the king began longing for Absalom. After mourning Amnon, his heart turned toward the son who was still alive. David's anger gradually changed into a father's longing. Joab, the king's general, noticed the change in David's attitude. Joab understood the king's moods better than most people. He noticed the king asking quiet questions about Geshur. David desired Absalom's return, but remained silent because of royal dignity. A king could not easily recall a son who had committed murder. There needed to be a careful process that preserved royal authority. Joab decided to create such a path for reconciliation. During these political considerations, Tamar continued living quietly. She remained in the house that had belonged to Absalom. Her brother, who once protected her, was now living in exile. Justice had arrived, but it left her feeling alone. In Geshur, Absalom's hair grew long during exile. In royal courts, appearance was normally carefully maintained. His long hair symbolized how distant he had become from royal life. Years passed without reconciliation between father and son. David never officially summoned Absalom home. Absalom also did not formally ask for forgiveness. Both remained separated by pride and royal protocol. Joab grew tired of watching the silence continue. He believed both men desired reconciliation. Joab decided to break the stalemate with a clever plan. Joab summoned a wise woman from the town of Tekoa. Tekoa was known for people skilled in storytelling. The woman arrived dressed as someone in mourning. She appeared before David as a grieving widow seeking justice. Before the king, she told a story about 2 sons who fought. In her story, one son had killed the other. She explained that her family demanded the death of the surviving son. David listened carefully, as he did with every case brought before him. As the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. With these words, David promised protection for the surviving son. Then the woman spoke again. Let your servant speak one more word to my lord the king. Why has the king promised mercy to a stranger's son, while his own son remains in exile? David realized that the story had been guiding him toward a deeper truth. Joab's plan had succeeded in revealing the king's contradiction. David allowed Absalom to return to Jerusalem. However, the king set an important condition. Absalom could live in his house, but could not see the king's face. This was only partial reconciliation. Absalom returned from exile, but his return felt incomplete. For 2 years he lived in Jerusalem without seeing his father. Scripture records this in 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 28. Absalom heard news about the royal court, but could not participate. He lived in the city as if he were still a stranger. Eventually, frustration pushed Absalom to act. He decided the silence between him and the king could not continue. His response would be bold and destructive. Absalom set fire to Joab's barley field. Flames destroyed the grain Joab had cultivated. The rising smoke served as a clear message. "Why have your servants burned my field? I sent for you so that you could bring me before the king. Why did I return from Geshur? It would have been better for me to remain there. Let me see the king's face, and if I am guilty, then let him put me to death." Absalom demanded either full restoration or judgment. Joab returned to David and explained the situation. He told the king that the separation could not continue. David agreed to see his son again. After many years, Absalom would once again stand before the king. At last, Absalom came before King David. Scripture records in 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 33, that Absalom entered the king's presence. He bowed with his face to the ground before the king. His forehead touched the floor as he humbled himself. The gesture showed respect for authority and a request for mercy. The prince who had once fled into exile now stood humbled before his father. King David responded with a simple gesture. The king leaned forward and kissed Absalom. There was no long speech or public declaration. The kiss expressed reconciliation between father and son. From that moment, Absalom was restored within the family. Yet the memories of the past still remained. Time passed, and Absalom eventually had children. Scripture records that he had 3 sons. The names of the sons are not recorded. Absalom also had a daughter named Tamar, according to 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 27. The girl was known for her beauty. Absalom chose the name Tamar in memory of his sister. Each time the name was spoken, it reminded the family of the past tragedy. The younger Tamar grew up beautiful like her aunt. Her name carried both remembrance and sorrow. Tamar, the daughter of David, continued living quietly. Scripture says she remained desolate. Amnon's death had brought justice, but not healing. The wound she carried remained deep. Within David's household, the name Tamar became both memory and memorial. It honored the daughter whose life had been shattered. It also carried beauty and dignity into the next generation. Meanwhile, Absalom's ambitions quietly grew. Each morning, he positioned himself near the city gate. In ancient Israel, the gate was where legal matters were heard. People came there seeking justice and decisions. Absalom greeted those who came seeking judgment from the king. He spoke kindly and listened to their concerns. "If only I were judge in the land, then everyone could come to me and receive justice." His words sounded compassionate to the people, yet behind the kindness was careful strategy. Slowly, he gained the favor of the people. The tragedy that began with Amnon had not truly ended. David's earlier silence had begun a chain of consequences. First there was silence, then revenge, then exile. From resentment grew political ambition. Tamar's story became more than a personal tragedy. Her name carried memory through generations. It served as a warning about the weight of human choices. King David learned a painful lesson from these events. Avoiding justice can itself become a choice with lasting consequences. Decisions left unresolved can affect many lives later. Stories like this reveal the brokenness within human history. They also show how Scripture records these difficult moments honestly. The story invites reflection on the weight of our decisions. Thank you for following this story until the end. May the peace of God be with you. Until we meet again, here on Hidden Bible.